You know, guys, I feel like people will call me elitist for this, but I realize that I really only like champagne that's been sitting at the bottom of the Baltic Sea for 170 years. I mean, why settle for anything else?
It is so funny you say that because I'm kind of the same way about mineral water.
Hmm.
I'm confused.
Ugh, keep up, Catherine. Last week, Le Figaro reported that a diving team from Poland discovered a 170-year-old shipwreck in the Baltic Sea, chock full of champagne and mineral water. My first thought is that is my kind of champagne, aged to perfection and nearly impossible to access. Why waste your time with young, underdeveloped champagne that hasn't felt the ocean's cold embrace?
Exactly.
Wait, hold on, you guys. There's so much I need to catch up on here. I'm with you on the champagne. I would love to taste that. I mean, it has been stored in the perfect environment, cool, quiet, dark, pressurized. But I am also digesting the fact that bottled mineral water was down there. That was a thing 170 years ago.
Yeah, of course. Along with the champagne, the divers apparently also discovered clay water bottles with the German brand name Selters, which I think is the origin of the word seltzer, stamped on them. This mineral water was highly valued back in the day, as it is now in my household, and it was considered to have healing properties and served by royalty and the aristocracy.
This is just so cool. We thought absurdly expensive mineral water was a new thing, and I guess it's not.
I guess not. Well, I guess I'm just glad that you are supporting Champagne Ruby because another news thing that came up this week apparently LVMH has announced that there was a severe drop in demand for its champagne brands in the first half of this year. Jean Jacques Guiony, LVMH's chief financial officer, attributes this to some sort of worldwide existential crisis. He says people are just too sad to pop bottles of Veuve or Dom Perignon.
I mean, there's a lot of scary stuff going on in the world, so I get this idea, but I really think their underwhelming sales are because they absolutely refuse to age their champagne in 19th century ships at the bottom of the sea.
Okay, next. So you don't think it's just like inflation or political uncertainty or, climate change or the war in Ukraine or the harrowing situation in the Middle East, for example.
Look, that's all part of the story, but I think it really comes down to the fact that they aren't letting their vintages sit at least 150 years before releasing them. My friends and I would be snatching up Moet and Krug if it were brought up from the depths of Davy Jones' locker.
I swear these CEOs and their sales departments don't even listen to millennials or Gen Z. All we've ever wanted were bottles of bubbly that were likely once headed to the court of Russia's Tsar Nicholas I, but instead sunk 20 or so nautical miles south of the Åland Islands between Sweden and Finland.
Oh, okay. So it's just that simple.
It's just that simple.
VWE declares bankruptcy. Politicians and producers want to blow up the bubble tax. Winemakers are fretful thanks to the French far right, and the man behind the American winery aesthetic has passed away. These are the four wine news stories we're discussing this week on your favorite wine news podcast, The Four Top. I'm your host, Catherine Cole, joined by Ruby Welkovich and Nick Toole. We are starting this week's episode with a story we have been following since episode 138. There were warning signs, and now it's official. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Napa Valley Register, and numerous other publications this week, Vintage Wine Estates, the parent company of multiple American wineries, has declared bankruptcy and is planning a mass layoff of 377 employees.
Which is essentially its whole workforce. Some of the affected wineries include Calistoga's Clos Pegas and Girard, Sonoma Coast Vineyards, and Ace Cider in Sebastopol. Vintage Wine Estates, or VWE, is the 15th largest wine conglomerate in the US.
Ace Cider. Oh man, I remember they were everywhere in San Francisco during my short stint there. This is sad news, but not totally unexpected. Vintage Wine Estates reduced its workforce by 7% in 2023, and then another 15% earlier this year. It's sitting on $300 million of debt and is hoping to sell off its assets.
Yeah, and apparently it recently sold off Cosentino Winery in St. Helena for 10.5 million to address that debt, but obviously that's just a drop in the bucket. VWE also plans to voluntarily delist from the stock market where its price is hanging out at less than 10 cents per share.
Yikes. Well, we are thinking about the 377 members of the wine industry who are now facing unemployment. VWE has said it hopes that a future buyer or buyers will rehire those that were laid off, but that is far from a guarantee.
You know what we don't do enough of on this podcast, guys?
What?
Drink wine.
Ooh, I love this idea. Let's take a little work break and taste something.
Yes, and thanks to our sponsor, we have some delicious wines to taste. Over the past few episodes, we have been learning about the Méditerranée IGP, a wine growing region spanning 10 départements from the historic town of Vienne on the Rhone River all the way down to the island of Corsica.
Yes, this region consists of 10,500 hectares, or in American, that's about 26,000 acres of vines.
This geographic diversity is matched by a diversity of grape varieties, which allows for a lot of creativity. The winemakers of the Méditerranée IGP are not constrained by strict appellation rules, so they can make beautiful and unusual rosé blends.
Ooh, I am excited to try some of these wines. So, hey, folks, keep on listening and join us later in this episode while we taste some rosés.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right, news story number 2. Who's ready?
I am only ready if it's about taxes and regulation.
Oh, gosh.
Just the juicy stuff.
How did you know? I am amped up to talk about taxes. So, this past weekend, one of my good friends reached out to me about the so called bubble tax. He makes craft cider and other fruit wines in central Maine and thought it was high time that the Foretop talks about the convoluted tax laws keeping cider makers, and actually winemakers, from innovating.
What a confusing name for a tax. I think we can all agree that bubbles are awesome. And also, bubbles are just air, right? So, is the bubble tax taxing air? Awesome air?
Yes, you got it, Ruby. The IRS is totally taxing air, and it is so frustrating. If you go to the website for the Alcohol, Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, which we all know is otherwise known as the TTB, and you look under the tax rates for wine, you will see some really interesting stuff. The tax rate for every gallon of still wine produced in the United States is $1.07 before credits. But the rate for sparkling wine is $3.40 per gallon. It's more than 3 times the rate just to make sparkling wine. It's crazy. Does not make any sense.
But wait, isn't it a lot more expensive to make sparkling wine than still wine? Like you have to ferment the wine twice and then let the bottles age on the lees and then riddle them and then disgorge them. That's a ton of inventory and work and time.
Yep, and what you're describing, Ruby, is traditional method sparkling wine, like champagne. But weirdly, artificially carbonated wine, which is a lot cheaper to make, gets taxed at a slightly lower rate, which makes 0 sense. But either way, the TTB brings a whole different meaning to the term carbon tax.
But Nick, so you mentioned that you became aware of this issue thanks to a cider maker friend, and cider is where this nonsense becomes even more nonsensical because cider is taxed by the federal government as either hard cider, still wine, or sparkling wine, depending upon the ingredients, the ABV, and the carbonation level.
Okay, wait, what? Why isn't it all just taxed as cider?
Because the TTB's definition of hard cider is really narrow. The feds say that to be considered hard cider, it has to be derived primarily from apples, pears, and water, containing no other fruit, and it must be less than 8.5% alcohol by volume. And it must have no more than 0.64 grams of CO2 per 100 milliliters of liquid. Essentially, the feds say hard cider has got to be flat, flat, flat.
Ugh, yeah, that flat, low alcohol cider just enjoys a great tax rate, just 23 cents per gallon.
Whoa, that sounds good. But cider can't just command champagne prices, so it makes sense that it should be taxed at a lower rate.
But the thing is, that definition is super limiting. A lot of folks get into alcohol production to make innovative, delicious ferments. So some of our most talented cider makers right now are doing delicious co-ferments with apples and wine grapes and pears and berries and whatever. And for them, the tax situation is super frustrating.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? I love those wine cider hybrids. And there are all those delicious artisanal hard ciders that have a really beautiful mousse, just a wonderful texture on the mouth. And that is thanks to a higher atmospheric pressure. So, say you make a hybrid and it hits a different CO2 threshold of, say, zero point 0.4 grams of CO2 per 100 milliliters. Now you're paying the sparkling wine tax, but you're only making cider, so you can't charge as much. It's like a big mess.
Come on, Catherine, keep up. That's only if you carbonate it in the traditional way. If you force carbonate it, you get a 10-cent discount to 3.30 per gallon.
Oh my god, my head is hurting.
Well, I think my cider maker friend puts it well. He says, "We have decided to either undercarbonate our ciders or simply not make certain innovative products so we do not fall into a certain sparkling threshold." He makes blueberry cider because it's Maine, baby. But if he carbonates that to sparkling wine levels like he would like to, his margins would dramatically change. He estimates that he'd be charged 17.48 per keg in taxes, which eats well into his margins if he carbonated as much as he wanted to. But he'd pay just 5.50 in taxes if he undercarbonated. He pays more than 3 times the amount in taxes just for a little bit more CO2.
Ugh, so literally, the feds are taxing air. Okay. So luckily, we were able to get in touch with Oregon Representative Earl Blumenauer to weigh in on this because he actually introduced what's called the Bubble Bill earlier this year. And actually, this was a bipartisan effort with Republican Representative Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania. Rep. Earl Blumenauer did not have any updates regarding how soon the bubble bill might pass, but he described H.R. 7029, that's also known as the Bubble Tax Modernization Act of 2024. Remember that, guys, as a common sense proposal to modernize the tax code so it does not needlessly disadvantage cider in favor of other carbonated fruit based beverages. Oh, this is so exciting. But you know what, guys? I want to add one more thing. This Bubble Tax Modernization Act of 2024 still does not change the situation for sparkling winemakers who, to Ruby's earlier point, make a product that's very expensive to produce. And on top of that, they are subject to 3 times the taxes per gallon that still winemakers are subject to. Now, I reached out to a few Oregon sparkling winemakers to ask them about this, and they basically said they're able to get a bit of tax relief for any amount they produce that is less than 30,000 gallons per year. That's a $1 per gallon credit right there for small producers. But listeners, the fact remains that sparkling wine is taxed at a higher rate than still wine in the United States. And I, as a sparkling wine lover, do not think this is cool. I mean, perhaps this explains in part why US produced domestic sparkling wines, traditional method, tend to be quite expensive. So, listeners, I have a question of the week for you. Whether you're a cider maker or a sparkling winemaker, or even just a consumer, how much is the bubble tax hurting you and your business? Share your thoughts with us on Instagram, where our handle is, you guessed it, the Four Top. So, guys, I was thinking we should talk about the election.
Oh my God. Finally, I have been dying to talk about this. There is so much going on in pop culture and social media right now, and we should get into why it's a compliment to say Kamala Harris is a brat. And did you know that she's a wine enthusiast? Apparently, she belongs to at least one winery club in California and goes to wine bars in Washington, D.C. She's able to talk about grape varieties, different types of oak. She's a real geek.
Huh. Well, I do see that, given that she's from California, and I am loving that whole storyline. I think we should actually revisit this soon, guys. But I was actually thinking about the French election, Ruby, because as I recall, that happened in early July when you and I were both out of the country. In fact, I think you were in France, and we haven't talked about it. And I've been wondering what the current fractured French political climate means for the wine trade.
I think a lot of us that have our eyes on Europe are curious to know why Marine Le Pen's far right National Rally Party is gaining ground there.
Right. I was just in Paris and I did hear about this. People were concerned that the populist National Rally might win the July elections, correct? But then no party got an outright majority. But people are still worried about what the increased popularity of the far right wing means.
Okay, well, to tie this back into wine, there was a New York Times piece about this by Roger Cohen that just popped up on my Apple News radar. It was about a general feeling of discontent in Burgundy and an increasing number of voters and politicians who are abandoning their former parties and moving right. In rural areas of France, according to Cohen, population is down, and public services like schools, train stations, post offices, and hospitals are closing, along with grocery stores and cafes.
Right. People feel abandoned, and gas and electricity prices are at an all time high thanks to the war in Ukraine. And the French government is encouraging its citizens to purchase electric cars, which they cannot afford. It sounds like people who live in the growing cities aren't affected by this, but rural areas are leaning to the right. and rural areas in France grow wine.
Yeah, and the wine growers are feeling the heat because the anti immigrant stance of the National Rally does not exactly favor an industry that uses migrant labor every harvest season.
Hmm. Why does that sound familiar?
Yeah, and the right wingers also sort of kind of quietly, like they say they don't, but they do under the radar support this idea of Frexit, which is kind of like Brexit, just like it sounds. It would be France either leaving the EU or else maybe weakening the European Union until it just crumbles.
Either way, it sounds like those running the French wine trade, which relies so much on exports, is pretty wary of the National Rally Party. Wine growers hire migrant laborers, and they export their products. But the folks who maybe work for those winery proprietors in wine country are fed up with all of their services and resources fading away. So they are maybe leaning a little more right.
Hmm. Lots to think about and watch here. I guess we need to go back to France and research this in person. In Paris, with a baguette and a glass of wine in hand.
You sound like a detached elite, Ruby.
I might be. I might be a detached elite. I am about to drink, can you see?
Oh, that's
This
so cute.
Ronea Rosemary.
Mm-hmm.
It smells lovely, very fresh. I'm definitely getting notes of citrus and strawberry, maybe a little bit of raspberry. It's really light, really refreshing.
Nice color.
hmm So, Ronea is a group of 400 growers in the southern Rhone, founded in 1925, so almost 100 years old. And it's delicious.
Ooh. I have in my glass Domaine de Pera Paparazzi.
Ooh.
Ooh.
So this one is made with Grenache, Carignan, and Cinsault. The vines are grown in clay limestone, south facing, and it's really nice. It's got this nice, like, slightly spice nose to it, and then it's punctuated with some really nice, like, watermelon and berry and just like red fruit in general. It's very tasty. Strawberries, grapefruit, but very refreshing overall. And the estate is actually an old 18th century farmhouse that they used to call a bastide. That was fortified back in the day. And it's on the edge of, Catherine, you're going to love this because you're the history buff here, the oldest road built in France, Domitia.
Whoa.
Domitia or Domitia. Yeah, that was an old Roman road. Pretty cool.
That's pretty sweet.
So I've got a wine from Vignoble Musée Barreau, and it's called Bois de la Garde. I believe this wine is sourced from Chateau Bois de la Garde. Okay, so I'm getting like a nice nose of Turkish delight. There's
Oh,
like
okay.
that kind of like powdered sugar and just very light aroma of maybe some nuts.
It's like dates and pistachios and stuff, right?
Pistachios, yeah, and dates, yes. Okay. But on the palate, it is pure, dry, refreshing, mineral, citrus, maybe some lime peel, lime. Yeah, this is a really lovely summer wine. Grenache and Cinsault, maybe some strawberry as well. All right, guys. Well, what did you think of our second tasting of IGP Méditerranée rosés?
It was delicious.
Refreshing.
Yeah. Are we getting paid to do this? This is great.
I think we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to Mediterranee IGP Rosé for sponsoring this episode.
Cheers.
It's not often that we pull a news story from Architectural Digest, but an AD 100 Hall of Fame architect died last week at the age of 88. Howard Backen designed more than 60 wineries in his long career.
Yeah, and along with his wife, designer Anne Ernest Backen, Howard Backen established really the luxury American wine country aesthetic, at least as far as I can tell. He was an adherent of so-called regenerative design, which is a type of design that apparently unites land, body, and building through framed views and environmentally conscious systems.
Not to be confused with my favorite phrase to pronounce, regenerative agriculture. I have a hard time with that sometimes.
Good job, Nick.
This style of design emphasized framed views, environmentally conscious systems, exposed rustic materials, and inspiration from traditional farm structures.
Yes, Backen has been called the master of the modern farmhouse, and he designed homes for many prominent Hollywood stars and directors.
I don't think we can emphasize enough how much influence Backen had on wine country aesthetic, though. He was a longtime close friend of Bill Harlan and designed multiple wineries and a home for him.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Harlan's wineries, and there really is this kind of signature back end look. It's like weathered, vertical, vintage barn boards, and elements that you'd expect to see in a winery, like concrete floors and glass garage doors, but they're done like just really beautifully in this very sophisticated and elegant way. And I have to say, personally, I really kind of identified always with Bakken. He was born in Montana, where my family's from, and raised in rural Oregon. So he had a really kind of innate, keen sense of barn design and just this love for the outdoors and this sense of bringing the outdoors in. So, a tip of the hat to Howard Bakken, who was able to elevate these ideas and establish this aesthetic of rustic luxury that really is a signature of American wine country and continues to resonate today. Cheers.
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 Okay, it's time for some input from our listeners, my favorite time of the week. Each week, we post a question on our social media looking for your input. And this week, folks were more than happy to voice their opinions.
Oh boy, were they ever. Following the end of the Chevron deference at the hands of the Supreme Court, we asked, should wineries be regulated by federal judges or the TTB?
Instagram user WBarrett02 kept things simple and just says federal judges with 3 laughing crying emojis. So I'm guessing it was more like, ha, federal judges. So I think he thinks that judicial regulation is comical.
At least in this case.
Yeah. He isn't the only one. At Stephen Whammy writes, a federal judge has plenty of other stuff to do. Regulating business and industry should be left to the agencies. The overturning of Chevron will needlessly clog the courts to the detriment of consumers. I think he might be right.
Add Adam R. Art to the list of haters. They say, do you want super conservative judges making rules about alcohol? Seriously?
Well, the TTB actually has its detractors as well. So, Posterity Cider Works is not happy with the way the TTB rules on regulations, writing, I was told by the TTB last week that we had to remove, quote, no artificial flavor or colors from our labels because it could be considered derogatory toward other companies that do add those things. And anything we make with wine grapes cannot mention the type of grapes. It's just, quote, grape cider. So I would say they're a pretty garbage agency.
Wow, that sounds very frustrating. Well, thank you to all the folks for weighing in, and check our Instagram page for our most recent question of the week. When bills don't get paid in the wine business, who gets hurt? Guys, August is my birthday month and it's coming right up. So, what I want for my birthday this year is an episode with 2 dessert courses. So, here goes. Let's do it right now. First up, we have a dessert that's a little thank you to our sponsor, IGP Rosé Méditerranée, because y'all know I love rosé all day. So we asked their representative here in the United States, Charlotte Sell, who has a beautiful French accent, to send us some delicious summer rosé pairing ideas for our first dessert in this episode. So with that, take it away, Charlotte.
We are doing some exciting work with the Mediterranean rosé folks, and this is how I like to pair the rosé wines. First, with my summer go-to fruit salad, which is peaches, cantaloupe, mint, agave syrup, and fresh lemon juice. Try it. And 2, with friends, of course, but also I cannot wait to share soon with Emily in Paris, the rosé wines from the Mediterranean. Enjoy the summer.
All right, so now how about we do an in-house dessert item for my second dessert? So who here, guys, from the Four Top team would like to share their dessert?
I got something. Thanks to a good friend of mine, I've enjoyed Rouge from winemaker Christian Vignay, I believe, a couple of times lately, and it's delicious. It's a natural red wine made entirely in cement with Pinot Noir and Gamay grapes. It's kind of a little lively, bubbly on the tongue, has some nice minerality and earthiness, and some nice light berry red fruit notes, and I highly recommend it.
That sounds like a chillable red.
I was just going to say that, but I didn't want to sound basic and obvious.
I did drink it slightly chilled.
Oh, man.
Guys, do you think maybe for our next episode we should just talk about chillable reds?
An entire episode just for chillable reds?
Just in honor of Ruby?
That sounds like an excellent idea.
You know what? I think it would be even more excellent if we recorded it in person.
Let's do it. What the heck? I will jump on a plane to New York. Let's do it.
Woo!
Well, this has been the Four Top Podcast. I am our executive producer, Catherine Cole.
I'm our producer, Nick Toole.
I'm media and design manager Ruby Walkovich.
Keelan King is the composer and performer of our theme music, which is so bubbly and wonderful. It really should be the song of summer. Please visit our website, thefourtop.org, to learn more about us and listen to back episodes.
And if you have not already subscribed to the Four Top on iTunes or Spotify, please do so, and please leave us a rating.
Hey y'all, this is important. Every rating feeds the algorithm and helps new listeners find the Four Top.
Well, from a state of co-fermented wine cider deliciousness, this is Catherine signing out.
From my bedroom where I've just broken open my piggy bank to see if I can afford a Napa winery, this is Nick signing out.
From my new storefront in Brooklyn, where I'll be selling Baltic-aged champagne and mineral water, this is Ruby signing out. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening.